In Germany right now, there's been a real revolutionary transformation of the grid there. I have some video looking what the kind of new German energy future or present looks like. You got times when half the power in Germany is being produced by renewables. You have a tremendous explosion of wind and solar generation. How did this happen, Dave? How did Germany begin to undertake this?
It's a really fascinating story. The German law doesn't cost, this is worth saying, it doesn't cost the government any money. Electricity ratepayers pay an extra fee to subsidize people who install solar or wind. And people who install solar and wind are guaranteed a higher than market rate of return for something like a decade. These are called feed-in tariffs, in keeping with Green's, aptitude for great terminology.
Screw it. Tomorrow we're doing an hour on feed-in tariffs.
Feed-in tariffs. Yes. I had dinner with the parliamentarian in Germany who got this passed, Hans Josef Fell, last year, and I asked him. I was like, this one law is like a lever that is transforming one of the biggest industrial economies in the world. How in the world did you make this happen? Especially relative to the frozen politics in the U.S. And he's like, well, we passed it in 2000, and everybody laughed at me. Everybody thought it was this trivial thing. Everybody thought, it's not going to make a material difference to anything. And so they just didn't pay attention.
That's
like the big utilities in Germany are just as opposed as our big utilities are. But they sort of snuck this thing in, and it's just ratcheted its way up to forcing Germany to make these big systemic decisions.
It's basically for the person that wants to have a wind turbine or a solar panel, it's giving them the incentives and guaranteeing a certain return.
And certainty.
Certainty, right? Like if I put this in, and is that the reason, like I asked myself, I remember being in Turkey, okay, and looking, you're driving through a town of 50,000 in the middle of Turkey, in the center of Turkey, and every single water heater is a solar powered water heater. And just thinking to myself, why isn't that the case in California or Arizona? Like, if this is not some super sophisticated technology, this is a place that per capita GDP is way lower than the U.S. I'm not in some cosmopolitan high-tech center. I'm in the middle of a town in Turkey, and yet there's every single water heater solar powered. Why is it not the case that we have more deployment like that in the U.S.?
I wish I could answer that.
So a couple of points there. In terms of solar hot water heating specifically, which is such a simple solar technology, we actually have a lot of natural gas water heaters in this country, which are very efficient. Right. So I think solar hot water heaters are a great idea, but I think that natural gas, if that's what you've got, if you've got a tankless hot water,
is already doing it fairly efficiently.
Very efficient. Right. In terms of solar PV technology, it's growing very quickly in the U.S., and I think we've touched a little bit on the fall in prices, which of course has pushed the adoption. Another big factor are the number of different products that solar companies are offering. You asked why don't more people do it? Well, it's hard to pay for something up front that you're going to use over 25 years. Yep. But when a company like Solar City, that I think is going to have a very successful IPO next couple of weeks, if they say you don't have to pay any more than what you're paying currently for solar, and we'll take care of everything. All you have to do is give us the real property on your roof. I think that has a huge. There are many companies like that doing that.
That's a great example of how most of this now is being driven by private dollars, your dollars, my dollars, various businesses' dollars. Dave, I was thinking when you're talking about feed-in tariffs, well, geez, is there something about solar that it needed that special price guarantee? If you look back six decades in the United States, not only were prices guaranteed for the big conventional power plants that were built, but each company got a monopoly guaranteed market share. Right. That's how those plants got built. Today, with solar and renewables, it's mostly private dollars driving that industry.
And another thing that Shalini brings up is, with the price of panels being so low now, basically being commoditized, it's a cheap commodity now. The differences in solar prices between installed solar in the U.S. and the installed solar in, say, Germany are what's called soft costs, which are things like acquiring customers, installing, maintenance, and financing, which is a huge, huge piece. And the U.S. is just sort of getting in that game of soft costs. And in Germany, those costs are tiny relative to the U.S. So there's lots of room there to move.
I'd just like to pick up on your mentioning of finance, because it is so critical when you talk about solar electricity. Solar panels are warranted for 25 years. right? So they're going to generate power reliably for decades to come. And if somebody asked me to pay for 3 decades of electricity, through my utility bill, I'd have a hard time.
Right. Exactly.
But that's what you're effectively asking folks
when you ask them to buy. Right.
So financing is absolutely critical to enable users of solar systems to pay for these systems over time.
We've talked about the U.S. and we've talked about what's happening in Germany, which is a sort of one path forward. From the climate perspective, the single most important thing is what happens in the pathway of development of those places that are not very energy intensive right now as they become energy intensive. And do they go the pathway of clean and renewable energy, or do they go the pathway of essentially diesel burners and coal? Because if they do the latter, we're basically screwed. And Bob, you run an incredible nonprofit that works on electrifying places that don't have electricity with solar. I want you to talk about the work you do because I think it's really remarkable right after this break.